Hi everybody, welcome back to Cerebral Tackle. As promised, I've continued to dive into the Josh Stracner story out of Orange, Texas on the Sabine River, his being deemed ineligible to fish. We have new information. Now it's going to be a lot of information coming down, so please bear with me. But let's get right to it. Doing a good old-fashioned, old-school journalistic deep dive on this story like I do all my stories, I have uncovered some issues that both B.A.S.S and Josh Stracner probably need to address sooner than later going forward. Now, like I said, you're really going to want to stick with me to the end of this video, because part of these issues that B.A.S.S and Josh Stracner are going to have to look at going forward include possible revising of the standings on B.A.S.'s end for both last year and this year, and on Josh Stracner's end, possible, I emphasize possible, criminality for both last year and this year, depending on when his ticket was received for no license and how those particular states view that violation in their state as part of the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact. Included in this going forward means also possible ineligibility for Josh Stracner in the 3 upcoming events left on the Elite Series schedule for this year. That's the next one coming up here in Michigan on St. Clair, and the following 2 in New York. Before we get any deeper into this, let's take a look at how the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact actually works. I've done more research and I've learned a lot more, so let's touch on a couple things real quick. First, I got something wrong in my last video. I said 48 states were members of the Wildlife Violator Compact. I was wrong. It's now 49, because since Runyon and Kaminsky got convicted up in Ohio for the walleye cheating scandal, one other state has been added to the roster. So Josh Stracner said on his Instagram account that only a handful of states participate in this. I would say 49 out of 50 is a bit more than a handful. He also stated on his Instagram account that he didn't know that he had lost his license in that specific state. That's interesting, because every state I've talked to says that when that violation is handed to you, you are told they are part of the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact, and that it may actually affect your ability to fish in other states. Now let's get to how it works. Let's say a person commits a violation in one of the 49 member states. That violation is then entered into the database of the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact. Now where it goes from here completely depends on how the state operates their database versus their licensing system program. Some states have to manually enter every single violator from the database into their licensing system program. So this will also entail whether they have that same violation in their state, like in this case, not having a fishing license, and what their punishment is versus the punishment of the prescribing state where the violation occurred. So using this case as an example, let's say they feel like a year of not having a license is too much punishment. What they'll probably do is enter it into their system and then go with whatever their punishment for that state is for that violation. However, a lot of states prefer to respect the original state's decision and go with their punishment despite what their own is. The trick is going through these on a case-by-case basis and manually entering them can take forever. So sometimes there is a big gap between when the violation occurs and when it actually hits their system. Now, it does not mean that that person is legal to fish until they find out. If they're not supposed to have a license in that state, they're fishing illegally. In other states, however, this is an automatic process because they've actually integrated the database with their licensing system. As a matter of fact, that's how it got caught in Texas. In talking to Texas, I've learned that they've integrated the Wildlife Violator Compact database with their system, so it was an immediate red flag and a "you're not getting a license" in our state. So depending on how each state integrates the information from the Wildlife Violator Compact database into their own licensing purchasing system, it's completely possible for a person to purchase a license in a state he's not supposed to have one in, a state that absolutely concurs with a punishment from the state that originally gave him the ticket. It's absolutely possible, but there is a catch. From the officials I've talked to, in states where the implementation of the information from the database to the licensing system is a manual process where they have to hand enter it, well, in those cases, there's a question that pops up when the person buys their fishing license. Whether it be electronically on your phone, a tablet in a store, or just talking to the vendor. The question goes something like this. Have your license privileges been suspended or revoked in another state? Ooh. Now, clicking on the wrong thing there could also mean perjury. So it's possible for someone who's been revoked in another state to just simply click no and hope they're not caught. But if they're busted again for not having a legal fishing license and maybe even for answering that question improperly. This is how I handled my research for this story. He was just deemed ineligible to fish the Sabine River in Orange, Texas. He said his license had been suspended for a year. So I took this date and went back 1 year to last year and contacted the DNRs for the respective states to see what their rules were on whether he would be eligible to fish those lakes. That's part of last year's schedule, towards the end of it, and then all of this year's schedule leading up to the Sabine River. That would include 1 year. Now, I'm still waiting to hear back from a couple of states, but I did get information from the great state of South Dakota, where he fished the B.A.S.S. Elite Series event on Lake Oahe last year in August. Now, according to wildlife officials in South Dakota, if an angler is fishing in their state while having a suspended license in another member state, they are not legal to fish their state. If August of last year fell within that year time frame of when his license was suspended in whatever state he got the violation in, well, then he wasn't supposed to fish there in the Oahe event last year. So the big question is, when did the original violation occur? We're still digging into that, and if I find it, you'll find out as soon as I do. So that's what it could mean for past events last year. There still could be some included. Now, what does this mean going forward for future events for this year? Because there's still 3 stops left on the Elite Series Tour. Lake Michigan is host to the next stop on Lake St. Clair. Then it's on to New York to finish out the season. The first event being Lake Champlain, and then they follow it up on the St. Lawrence River. So we're back to the million-dollar question. When did the original violation occur? Because if it still falls under that full year suspension when it comes up to Michigan and New York, he could be deemed ineligible to fish both of those states, all 3 events. It's up to him and B.A.S.S to dive into this to find out what he needs to do to get legal. Otherwise, it's a possibility his season is already over. One thing that's not going to work for him going forward is claiming he didn't know about it. Because like I said before, each state I've talked to say that they warn you about the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact and that it could affect your fishing rights in other states. So he needs to grasp that, get that under control, and get in touch with Michigan and New York and get this thing figured out. What he can't afford to do is just try to slide past this. It's his responsibility to contact every single state that's within that year time frame, last year and this year, and find out if he was legal. And if he wasn't, fall on his sword. Otherwise, it's an absolute kick in the teeth to every single hardworking person who goes out, pays for their license, and makes sure that they're legal. Hey, not everyone gets to fish for a living, and it's an insult to those who don't. Oh, and those that do too, his fellow competitors. Let's dive into that. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that it's found that he wasn't supposed to compete in some other events from last year. How does that retroactively affect standings from last year? Winnings, possible qualifications in the Bassmaster Classic. This thing could have a downhill slew of consequences. Keep in mind, folks, just in the year time frame we're talking about now, he's placed in the money 3 times. Once last year, twice this year. What does that mean? B.A.S.S needs to address this. And see, folks, the same thing goes for this year as well. What standings and winnings can be affected? If B.A.S.S wants to do the right thing, they'll find out, get to the bottom of when this violation occurred, go back that full year, contact those states, and fix the standings, the winnings, everything retroactively as it pertains to how this event impacts that competition. You know, this is not something they can just sweep under the rug with a press release. They really need to get to the bottom of this and fix it for the integrity of the sport and for the sake of their other anglers that are competing against this individual. Now, I've reached out to B.A.S.S for comment on this very issue, and so far, no response. However, I believe it's something they need to take seriously, because even though he isn't a top-tier competitor, There are folks underneath him that are buying and clawing and need every single point in the standings they can get. And if they're fishing against someone who shouldn't have had a license in some of these states, I can understand how they would be fairly pissed off. So Bass needs to maintain the integrity of competition by handling this the right way. Otherwise, it's like they're saying it's the Wild Wild West and anything goes. And that's not good from an organization who touts conservation. At any rate, folks, you know me. I'm going to stick to this story, and as new information comes down the pipe, I'll give it to you as soon as I have it. Now, I know I can be long-winded, and if you stuck with me this far, you're a freaking trooper. I want to thank you, each and every single one of you, for watching. Please leave a comment, like, share, subscribe. Then get your gear together, pack it up, get out there in this beautiful weather, and don't forget, keep it wet.